What is up? Welcome to the pod. Today we are talking about fat loss and menopause. So this is going to be a bit of a myth-busting episode as well as a how-to episode as far as how to lose fat, whether you are pre, peri, or post-menopausal. Because I have worked with tons of women, the majority of my clientele are female, who've been either pre, peri, or postmenopausal, and we've gotten them great fat loss results regardless. So I'm going to share with you exactly how. Also, a lot of the same principles in this episode are going to apply to men as well in regards to fat loss. So dudes, I'd recommend that you continue to listen to this for two reasons. One, it's just useful and interesting to know this stuff. And two, you can use a lot of the same principles to lose fat yourself, even if you are male. Okay, let's dig in. The average age for menopause is 49 for smokers and 51 for non-smokers. And you might be wondering, why that discrepancy? The reason is smoking shortens lifespan and is detrimental to health, as we all know. And therefore, it only makes sense that menopause occurs earlier in women who smoke because on average, they are unhealthier. Menopause is all about reproduction, right? And reproductive fitness is all about health. If a mother is not healthy, the baby is far less likely to survive pregnancy. And so this is just simple biology 101 stuff. Also, this doesn't just apply to smoking specifically, because if we see women go through menopause very early, regardless of whether they smoke or not, it is a sign that something is off health-wise. For example, if a woman goes through menopause at 39, let's say, her physiology is saying the host isn't healthy enough to carry a baby to term, so let's shut down the potential for reproduction because this isn't the environment for a healthy kiddo. Now, as menopause approaches, the menstrual cycle becomes a little less predictable. Estrogen levels begin to trend down, and eventually there are no eggs to fertilize. Now, just because you are no longer able to have a baby doesn't mean that evolution or life is done with you yet. Grandparents play a crucial role in child rearing and guiding both their children and their kids' kids. And so evolution still wants you to be healthy and fit. It's just that your role has shifted from that of a parent to more of a grandparent. Now you might be thinking, grandparent, I'm only 51. But you've got to remember that our timelines are far different now than they were for the vast majority of our evolutionary history. Folks are waiting longer and longer to have children nowadays, whereas not that long ago, I'm talking 50 to 100 years, we were having children far younger. My grandpa had my dad at 17. That was perfectly normal. And it's worth mentioning that in certain areas of the world, my father was born in India, folks tend to have families a lot younger, even today in 2023. Now, as reproductive capabilities trend down, sex drive may trend with it, which makes perfect sense because the whole point of evolution is to essentially turn calories into babies. And when you take babies out of the picture, i.e. menopause, it doesn't make sense for evolution to prioritize sex as much anymore. Now, humans obviously don't just have sex to have babies, hence contraception, but on a physiological level, it's potentially a relevant component in the mix. Now, a lot of things influence sex drive. Health is a huge one, but so is psychology. So this really tends to vary between individuals. This is also where there's an interesting difference between men and women, because as long as men are healthy enough, they can technically have children into their 50s, 60s, 70s, because once they provide the sperm, their job is somewhat done on a physical level. Point being, There may well be a biological difference between men and women in terms of sex drive as they age. Again, it's absolutely going to depend on the individual and largely that given individual's health status, but it's just sort of an interesting thing to think about from an evolutionary standpoint. There's a saying that I love, and it is, nothing makes sense except in the light of evolution. I've talked about so many examples of this on the pod over the years, and when you start to view the world through an evolutionary lens, everything just starts to make a lot more sense. Because if you're ever wondering why we are the way that we are, or the world is the way that it is, if you put on your evolutionary glasses, it begins to become a lot more clear, and menopause is no exception. So this brings us to our first myth, which is that fat loss becomes harder when you are pre, peri, or post-menopausal. And fortunately, that is not the case for three primary reasons. The first one is that estrogen declines via menopause. And so I'm sure that you've heard many folks talk about how estrogen in and of itself is apparently a fattening hormone, right? Oh, my estrogen is too high, and so I'm gaining and holding on to body fat. Well, if that's the case, it can't be both, right? It can't be that high estrogen causes fat gain and then menopause also causes fat gain or fat loss resistance via estrogen. Because in menopause, estrogen levels are declining and settle at an all-time low after a woman goes through menopause. So there's some faulty logic going on there. Number two is that movement tends to change as we age. This is one of the primary reasons why folks believe that their age is the reason why they've gained fat and have a hard time losing it. You'll hear things like, what I used to do isn't working anymore. And I always find this so interesting because folks have a hard time remembering what they ate for lunch a few days ago, but somehow they think that they're accurately remembering every aspect of their lifestyles when they were, say, 25 or 35 years old. As we age, activity levels tend to trend down. People move less, and not only do they voluntarily move less, society is set up in a way that actually favors this. For example, if I'm sitting on a bus, I'm socially encouraged to give my seat to someone who is older than me. And it's a really nice gesture, right? But what burns more calories, standing or sitting? Standing, of course. Also, as we age, we tend to shift into a mentality of I'm weaker, less able, and more injury prone. And so maybe someone gets a grocery store attendant to carry their groceries out to their car instead of doing it themselves. Maybe they decide not to pick up that moderately heavy item and they ask one of their children to do it for them instead. Perhaps they stop lifting weights because they're afraid of injuring themselves, which is super ironic because lifting weights actually injury-proofs you, and the weaker that you are, the more likely you are to get injured. But again, it's a mentality. Now, all of these little movement or lack thereof things in isolation aren't a huge deal, but they really add up when they're compounded over the course of time. We just gradually see people move less and less and sit more and more as they age. The third and most important input is nutrition, because diet also tends to shift as we age. We see folks eating even less protein and more carbs and fat, which not only keeps them less satiated, which then results in more total calories consumed, it also tends to accelerate muscle loss even further. Another very common thing that middle-aged folks, and specifically women, enjoy is wine. Wine has calories. Wine also interrupts sleep. Interrupted sleep leads to more calories consumed and less of a desire to move and exercise, and on goes the snowball, right? Now, fortunately, like I mentioned at the outset of this episode, I have worked with tons of folks in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. I'm actually working with a 75-year-old right now, funny enough. And all of these folks, no matter their age, have lost fat and gotten healthier just like you can via improved nutrition, movement, and sleep habits. I'd toss stress management in there as well, just because it heavily influences our nutrition, movement, and sleep behavior. That is the recipe. That's all that's required. Lifestyle for the win. These individuals, my clients, are not special. I mean, they're special to me, but they are not physiologically unique. They're just committed. And just as a side note, how cool is it that someone would come to me in their 70s saying, Marcus, I want to look, feel, and perform better in my life? Like, what does that say about the mentality of that individual, that they're still looking to learn, grow, and essentially live the best life that they can well into their 70s and beyond? Super inspiring stuff. Another thing that menopausal women often experience are hot flashes, which are described as a sudden sensation of heat, typically in the upper chest and face, and is also associated with sweating, anxiety, and palpitations. Palpitations are just increased heart rate, essentially. Interestingly, I had a client describe this exact experience to me the other day, and she's super healthy and in her 30s with young children, so nowhere near menopause. And I explained exactly what was going on to her, which was she had a blip of blood sugar dysregulation. I'm sure that you've had a blood sugar crash at some point or another where you felt lightheaded, hot, dizzy, a little sweaty maybe, and wanted to eat anything and everything in sight. This is because your body is yelling at you to get your blood sugar levels back up. Now, what causes blood sugar crashes? Funky food choices, lack of movement, and inadequate sleep. This is a prime example of how it's so easy to point the finger at something other than a very simple and straightforward input, right? We see this via night sweats and sleep disturbance as well. For example, many women experience night sweats and disturbed sleep around menopause, but so does everyone else. I've had the night sweats tons of times, as well as disturbed sleep, and so have my clients of all ages. And the primary causes are alcohol intake and eating too much and or too close to bed. For example, if you have a glass of wine or two, or you eat a decent sized meal or snack an hour before going to bed tonight, it is far more likely that you'll wake up in a pool of sweat, because eating and or drinking calories causes your body to heat up via the breakdown of said calories. This is what the metabolism is. So it's not just women that experience these quote unquote hot flashes or night sweats. Men experience this too, because it's a matter of behavior, not that declining estrogen is somehow flushing your face and chest. Women also often report things like mood changes and brain fog. Blood sugar dysregulation via funky food choices, alcohol intake, and disturbed sleep will mess with anyone's mood and cognition, no matter how old they are or what's between their legs. And so, as you can see, these quote unquote menopause symptoms are just a reflection of specific behaviors, which is great news. Well, great news if you want to take your power back and get results. Bad news if you were looking for a scapegoat, wink wink. What about estrogen therapy? In my opinion, I think that a good rule of thumb is to dial in lifestyle via better nutrition, movement, and sleep first and foremost. And this applies across the board for the implementation of just about any drug, right? If you're experiencing a health issue, the first whistle stop is rarely ever a drug. The first place to look is diet, movement, and sleep. And then potentially decide if estrogen therapy or any other modality is the way that someone wants to go after they set their body up for success. Now, if someone is not willing to modify their diet, movement, and sleep habits, that's a different story. And either way, to each their own, Just know that the root cause of those underlying issues or symptoms are not going anywhere if lifestyle isn't addressed. So the real moral of the story, or take home here, is don't let anyone tell you that you can't look, feel, and perform amazingly well, whether you are pre, peri, or post-menopausal. Don't give your power away like that. So many of the health complications and issues that we currently experience, we've come to believe are normal. And normal is a completely different thing than common. You do not have to be a statistical average, especially because average in regards to health has been steadily trending down for decades now. Again, I have worked with so many women in that menopausal age range, and I can say that their fat loss results have not been impaired in the slightest. Their results are always a reflection of their habits and lifestyle. And that goes for whether someone is 25, 45, or 65. If you're interested in applying for one-on-one nutritional coaching and or workout design with me, you can click the link in the description below or head on over to n1fitness.com/coaching. On Instagram, I'm at N1Fitness, TikTok at the N1Fitness, and on YouTube at Marcus Sadu. Feel free to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform, if you'd like to, of course. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope that you found this episode empowering and useful, and I will catch you on the next one. See ya!